Thank you for plugging into this Family Life News podcast, streaming issues-driven, family-focused news.
This is Faith Under Fire. Each Thursday on Family Life, we give voice to religious battlegrounds in this nation. I'm your host, Tracy Lynn. With us today, Tate Gregory, once a radical feminist who picketed outside of pregnancy care centers. She shares her story. Kama, this week in the news, I noticed NFL analyst and former football coach Tony Dungy responding to an Atlanta pastor that says he supports abortion. Dungy commented that pastors who feel that way must not be reading the Bible. Now, being trained as a pastor is different from your background, Kama, and yet you once adamantly supported abortion. Would you tell us briefly about your story and how you came to that decision years ago?
Yes. I grew up in a fairly educated house, and we used to talk about current events, and my family used to just have a conversation at the dinner table, and one of those topics ended up being about women's rights and abortion and all of that. And so as the oldest of three, we ended up just having pretty heated debates. My parents were very pro-life and very conservative. And, of course, as a blossoming teenager, I wanted to be whatever my parents weren't. So that was part of it. And also, I became very involved in the pro-abortion movement because when I would look on the news, when we would watch it before we would talk about it, or I would read anything in the magazines or newspapers, it was really the most articulate and what seemed to be compassionate and non-judgmental people tended to be on the pro-choice or pro-abortion side. And then I would look at the news the next night, and it would be people that called themselves pro-life, and they would be angry and yelling. And honestly, majority of them on the news were men. And I just fed myself a steady diet of the message that really an educated, empowered woman, abortion has been legal my whole life. So why wouldn't abortion be an option for women? And why would I have anything to say about that? So I really started getting very involved and picketing pro-life places.
Kama, what led to the change in you?
For those of you that might be listening that may have an abortion in your past, I mean, it's something I sat on for decades. Going into my high school year, I had a great boyfriend, no drugs, no drinking, blah, 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 really good kid, oldest of three. Got into all my colleges that I applied to, captained the cheerleading squad, involved in youth group, but I found myself pregnant, and I could not tell anyone. My family dynamics were such where it would not have been a good thing for me to tell them at all. So I went to what was known as a hope clinic and essentially had an abortion without anyone knowing. So I had to go over the river to Illinois because I was under 18. And it was the most awful experience as a woman now that I have had true health care. It was not empowering. And I was scared to death. And I really made that decision in a vacuum, as many women do, because it's still something that's very hard to talk about with people that you love. So that just fueled my fire of being even more pro-abortion because I needed to truthfully understand and defend my position and why I made that decision. So I locked that down and went to college, and I had some secular professors challenge my philosophical viewpoint because I became a Christian in college, and then I started trying to figure out that worldview. And some of my professors said, hey, that's not consistent with what you're saying. You say you're a Christian, but then you say you value life. However, you're adamantly abortion from conception until birth. So part of it was that. I'm certain that people started praying for me. I started examining what I truly believed about the value of life and where it comes from. And then I started watching pro-life people be loving to women in unplanned pregnancies. I started getting involved in pro-life pregnancy centers that were just loving women. So I started volunteering, and I thought, what is this animal? This is an amazing thing. Not judgmental. They knew abortion was legal. They were not trying to change women's minds. They were actually trying to empower women to make a truly informed decision, just to understand that there were other options, and that ultimately, if you have a positive pregnancy test, you're growing a life inside, and not doing it with shame-based, really believing that speaking to that woman and connecting with her first without judgment and loving her well and giving her that value, and then showing her the value of the life that she's carrying, regardless of what she ultimately decides. So all of that together, put in a big mixer, and I really believe that's how God changed my mind, both through secular means and volunteering, and really getting a proper perspective on what the value of life is, no matter how young in the womb or disabled out of the womb.
Wow, Kama, thank you for sharing that. And I've talked to some women who've had abortions, and, you mentioned the shame that often comes with that and the compassion that you found at pregnancy care centers like PRC of the Valleys. You're going to be speaking as part of a virtual event coming up pretty soon.
Yes, that will be my first virtual event.
So that's coming up on Thursday, September 17th, the 2020 PRC of the Valleys virtual banquet and fundraiser. I guess listeners can go to that site and learn more. Kama, the abortion pill has become more widely used to take the lives of children, and I know it's being touted as a convenient fix to unplanned pregnancy. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it has been a real trend. And so as part of what I do for a living, I work with Focus on the Family, and I travel the country to help give grants to places like the PRC of the Valleys. So that's how I got to know that wonderful organization in your area there. But having said that, that is a huge national trend. I've probably been in 400 pregnancy resource clinics and centers across the country in my 9 years of consulting with them. And all that to say that in the last few years, it has been very challenging to try to reach women when they can have an abortion. A couple things on that. One, they can have it sooner, and they can have an abortion through what they call a medication abortion. So non-surgical, it's not as expensive, but they abort at home. So basically, they're able to have these abortions earlier, and they're also able to have them before they can actually see an ultrasound. So part of the tool of the truth and love, in my opinion, is that ultrasound and just educating them, again, without guilt or shame, but just saying, hey, this is what's going on, these are the facts, and allowing them to see that for themselves. But with this abortion pill, it's become very prevalent, and it's harder. It's super important. One of the things you'll hear me talk about at the banquet is that digital marketing. So people are looking at their phone and looking up abortions. And so one of the things we're trying to do is how do we get a presence out there so women know there are options other than these abortion pills that they can take. So I can't imagine how hard it must be, these women of all ages, because it's 18 to 24 is the highest consumer, I suppose, is what it's called, of abortion. And so, young women and young adult women aborting at home, it's definitely being touted as a solution. But from what we understand, there's also, just to mention, there's a tool called the abortion pill reversal, but they're able to actually reverse these abortion pills. So women will take the first round and change their mind, and then they can go to an APR, is the acronym for it. An APR, just search that up, and they can find a place where a physician can actually help them continue the pregnancies. So it's amazing. They've had a very high success rate with very little risk at all. Of course, I'm not a physician, but there are many children now that have been born because women maybe have a change of heart, or someone gets to them and says, hey, we'll help you. And they're able to actually stop that process, which gives them that hope.
That's amazing. Thank you for letting us know that. Kama, how can those of us that love life, including those vulnerable babies, have influence on the heart of someone who thinks the polar opposite on this subject right now? You mentioned there's often shame involved, often that fear of judgment. How can we lovingly build a bridge?
I think it all has to do with the way you approach it, the actions and the tone. First and foremost, praying, because today I know there are women and even young men trying to figure out what to do and making a decision. So keeping an open heart to them, promoting that there are places like PRC of the Valleys, talking about the fact that there are places that will support a young woman who may want to carry her child, talking in a loving manner, because there are a lot of post-abortive women out there, but explaining it isn't a decision that's made lightly, and it isn't one that just goes away, because the world will tell them, just make this quick fix and you won't have any grief or any complications or any issues. And we found that that just isn't true. So telling people that, hey, although it seems like something that would be an easy way to fix something that you might be embarrassed or ashamed about, it really does have its own set of consequences and its own set of things you have to process. And just loving them well. I think the whole thing is Jesus as the example of being willing to hear someone's story. It's not necessarily how they got into that position and the choices that they made, because yes, that's part of it, but part of it is really just loving them where they're at.
That's Tate Gregory. I'm Tracy Lynn, Family Life News.